Picture yourself settling into a comfortable chair late in the evening. Suddenly, an image of the beloved American sitcom, Uncle Brian Keith, flashes across the screen. You might remember him with a soft smile as Uncle Bill from Family Affair, or recall the warm fatherly presence he exuded in Disney's The Parent Trap. The name rings a bell of gentle humor and paternal charm, conjuring up memories of a man who was seemingly always there in the background of popular entertainment. But behind that kind, calm persona stood a human being, shaped by both the triumphs and tragedies of 20th century Hollywood and beyond. The story of Brian Keith, intertwined with the heartbreak surrounding his daughter Daisy, stands as a poignant testament to both the heights that fame can carry a person and the devastating shadows that can linger behind even the brightest of lights. Born on November 14th, 1921, in Bayonne, New Jersey, Brian Keith opened his eyes in a moment of national transition. World War I had ended just a few years before, and a new chapter of American history was unfolding. Complete with roaring jazz clubs and economic ups and downs, his parents, Robert Keith and Helena Shipman, were both performers in their own right, his father a multifaceted actor and writer, his mother also involved in stage and radio. One could say that the swirl of theater blood pumping through his family tree set the stage for Brian's own performing ambitions. Yet, as sometimes happens with creative and itinerant souls, Robert and Helena's marriage soon unraveled. They divorced while Brian was quite young. Suddenly, the boy was spending time in multiple worlds, sometimes with his father in Hollywood, sometimes with his mother in other performing venues, and often in the care of his grandmother on Long Island. You can imagine the confusion and excitement this kind of upbringing might bring. A scattered sense of home, yet an early immersion in the performing arts. Brian learned to read at an impressively young age thanks to his grandmother's dedication to feeding his curiosity. Maybe you can picture them in a cozy living room, a soft lamp illuminating a tattered children's book, with grandmother patiently pointing out letters, while Brian's young mind absorbed language like a sponge. Somewhere along that path, when he was just 3 years old, Brian found himself stepping into the unpredictable world of acting. For most toddlers, days are filled with crayons, toys, and occasional tumbles at the playground. But for Brian, early childhood involved glimpses of film sets, overheard lines of dialogue, props, and directors calling action. It's easy to imagine how these experiences might plant the seed of fascination that would one day grow into a career spanning multiple decades. His father's move to the burgeoning hub of Hollywood introduced Brian to an industry that was morphing from silent films into talkies. Even if Brian was not directly in the spotlight at that point, he was undoubtedly soaking up the energy of that era, a period when big studios controlled the fates of stars, and child actors might receive a sudden break in a film or radio program. Fast forward a bit to 1939, when Brian graduated from East Rockaway High School. America was on the cusp of major global conflict. World War II was brewing, and the call of patriotic duty resonated with countless young men. Brian was no exception. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 1942, serving until 1945. As an air gunner, he faced the perilous skies, an assignment that required courage and resilience. Whatever innocence he had left must have eroded quickly, replaced by the harrowing realities of combat in the Pacific Theater. These experiences, as with so many veterans, likely changed him forever, lending a depth to his later acting work that perhaps only those who have been under fire can convey. When the war ended, Brian, like many veterans, returned to a nation that was simultaneously weary of conflict, yet hopeful about the future. He benefited from the GI Bill, which opened doors to further study in the performing arts. Soon, he was refining his craft on stage, featuring in productions like Mr. Roberts, and eventually tackling roles on Broadway, including Darkness at Noon. Though he'd been around acting all his life, these early theater engagements helped solidify his understanding of technique, pacing, and character development. The stage, more than the glossy sets of Hollywood, taught him how to connect viscerally with an audience. By the early 1950s, producers were taking note of his presence, partly because his quiet intensity stood out in a sea of more flamboyant performers. In 1953, he won his first credited film role in Arrowhead, and throughout the 1950s he added roughly 20 film appearances to his resume. Titles like The Violent Men, 1955, Run of the Arrow, 1957, and Desert Hell, 1958, might not all be household classics today, but in their time, they showcased an actor who could handle gritty material as easily as comedic or family-friendly fare. Meanwhile, television was blossoming. In post-war America, TV sets were popping up in living rooms across the nation, and Hollywood recognized a golden opportunity to produce serialized stories for a public hungry for entertainment they could enjoy at home. Brian Keith hopped between the medium of film and TV anthologies, forging his reputation as a solid, dependable, even understated performer who elevated every scene he was in. By 1955, he had his own television series, Crusader, in which he portrayed freelance journalist Matt Anders. The character's motivation, horrified by the atrocities of World War II, aligned interestingly with Brian's personal history. Even though he later admitted the show never fully clicked with him, it was still another rung on the ladder to mainstream recognition. Looking back on his early career, it's intriguing to see how little Brian Keith orchestrated his own trajectory. He didn't cultivate a persona designed to wow casting directors, nor did he meticulously map out which roles would lead to superstardom. Instead, he took opportunities as they came, learning from each new set, each new director, and each new co-star. He carried with him a blue-collar attitude about acting. This was his job, and he intended to do it well. That ethic would remain integral to his identity for the rest of his life. However, the big family-friendly roles that defined Brian Keith's enduring public image began in earnest with Disney's The Parent Trap, 1961. In that film, he played the father of identical twin girls, both portrayed by Haley Mills, who've been raised separately by divorced parents. The twins conspire to reunite their estranged mother and father, leading to comedic and heartfelt moments. Watching Keith on screen, it's easy to see why audiences gravitated to him. He radiated a calm, fatherly warmth that never ventured into cheesy territory, an authenticity that made him believable as a parent figure, whether he was scolding the twins for pulling pranks or humbly trying to mend the broken relationship with their mother. The movie was a hit, anchoring his reputation as someone who could portray paternal characters with unforced charm. By the late 1960s, Brian Keith found the role that would cement him in the hearts of countless viewers, Uncle Bill Davis in the sitcom Family Affair. This show revolved around a worldly bachelor in Manhattan suddenly thrust into the role of caregiver for his late brother's 3 orphaned kids, Buffy, Jody, and Sissy. Assisted by a proper English butler named Mr. French, Sebastian Cabot, Uncle Bill attempted to balance work obligations, personal freedom, and the emotional upheaval of raising children who'd just lost their parents. The concept was fresh for its time, blending laughs with gentle lessons on family, love, and understanding. Audiences, in an era shaken by societal transformations, welcomed the show's sense of calm. It provided a soothing presence when people were grappling with the Vietnam War, civil rights struggles, and the general uncertainties of the late 1960s. In interviews, Brian expressed a kind of ambivalence about stardom, famously stating that he couldn't care less about chasing it. And yet, ironically, that laid-back attitude became part of his appeal. He projected a sense of authenticity that told viewers, I'm not putting on airs, I'm just here, doing my job. Over the show's 5-season run, Family Affair became a cornerstone of American TV. Decades later, in reruns, it continued to capture hearts. Many fans recall watching it alongside their families, forming a communal memory of Uncle Bill's comforting presence, punctuated by Mr. French's polite stoicism. But Brian Keith's personal life diverged dramatically from the wholesome paternal vibe we saw on screen. Married 3 times, first to Frances Helm, then to Judy Landon, mother of 5 of his children, and finally to Victoria Young, with whom he had 2 more children. He lived a life full of complexities, heartbreak, and, at times, desperation. One early tragedy was the loss of his son Michael in childhood. There are few experiences more gut-wrenching than losing a child, and that sorrow understandably remained an unhealed wound. Still, Keith continued to work, perhaps finding solace or distraction in the demands of filming and performing, yet the emotional burdens did not end there. Decades later, in 1997, his daughter Daisy died by suicide at the age of 27, shattering Brian's already fragile emotional landscape. To understand the backdrop of heartbreak in Brian Keith's broader family history, one can look at his stepmother, Peg Entwistle, an actress who married his father, Robert Keith, in the late 1920s. Peg's name is etched into Hollywood lore under devastating circumstances. In 1932, she jumped to her death from the H in the Hollywood sign. This haunting tale became part of the city's tragic mythology, underscoring how the same hills and letters that symbolize stardom can also cast deep, destructive shadows. Though Brian was only about 10 years old at the time, the traumatic event shows that around him, the line between a glamorous life and a tragic end was always perilously thin. Throughout the 1960s and beyond, Brian continued flexing his acting range with a variety of cinematic roles. He starred alongside Hollywood luminaries such as Marlon Brando, Elizabeth Taylor, and Doris Day, showcasing both comedic and dramatic chops. He was the kind of actor who fit into a broad swath of genres: westerns, comedies, family films, you name it. This versatility, while not always making him a superstar in the sense of marquee billing, cemented his reputation as a dependable professional who'd enhance any project. After Family Affair ended in 1971, Brian embarked on a string of television ventures that saw varying degrees of success. The Brian Keith Show cast him as a pediatrician running a free clinic in Hawaii. It didn't run for too long, but it was yet another example of how he was willing to keep exploring new characters, new settings, and new mediums. Then came shows like Archer, Pursuit of Happiness, and Heartland, plus many other film roles peppered throughout the subsequent decades. If you flip through the pages of Brian Keith's biography, you might feel that he was always in motion, always juggling projects, wives, children, and personal demons. There's something of the classic Hollywood undercurrent. On the surface, a wave of success, but swirling beneath are deep currents of tragedy and regret. You can look at interviews and see that, though he tried to maintain a modest, somewhat gruff exterior, he never fully escaped the weight of personal losses, and his health began to fail as the 1990s progressed. He had quit smoking 10 years prior, but the damage to his lungs had been done. Diagnosed with lung cancer and emphysema, He faced the grim reality of prolonged treatments, financial pressures from mounting hospital bills, and the emotional turmoil of losing Daisy to suicide only 2 months earlier. For a man who'd spent a lifetime projecting steadiness and paternal guidance, these combined hardships must have been crushing. On June 24th, 1997, the unthinkable happened. Brian Keith died by suicide in his Malibu home. He was 75. The same man whose paternal roles had comforted countless viewers, whose comedic timing and stoic resilience had made him a fixture in sitcoms and films, took his own life in a final desperate act. News of his passing sent shockwaves through the entertainment community. How could Uncle Bill, the gentle father from The Parent Trap, the war hero and journeyman actor, meet such a tragic end? Fans and co-stars grieved, trying to reconcile their memories of his warm, fatherly characters with the notion of a man pushed to the precipice by illness, heartbreak, and an overwhelming sense of despair. His departure, so closely following Daisy's, underscored the profound emotional toll that personal tragedies can exact, even on those who seem unshakable. For those who revisit Brian Keith's extensive body of work, stretching from gritty 1950s westerns to beloved 1960s family sitcoms, from comedic Disney roles to more dramatic 1970s films, there's a consistent strain of authenticity that emerges. He was never the loudest actor in the room, nor the flashiest. Instead, he delivered performances that made audiences think, "I trust this man." Whether he was leaning back in an armchair, calmly reassuring worried kids, or grappling with a difficult moral choice in a war film, that sense of reliability remained a hallmark of his craft. Curious viewers today might stream Family Affair and find a window into a particular cultural moment, complete with references to 1960s urban life, social norms, and comedic styles that have shifted with time. Or they might watch The Parent Trap to see the gentle humor and familial affection that made that film a Disney staple. They can even explore lesser-known ventures, whether it's cameo roles in other sitcoms or short-lived series that gave him a chance to stretch creatively. In every single project, there's a piece of Brian Keith's soul, a quiet fortitude shaped by childhood upheaval, shaped by war, shaped by personal triumphs and tragedies. His story also carries a sobering reminder of what can happen when deeply buried pain resurfaces. The heartbreak of losing children twice over, combined with his own terminal illness, may have convinced him that there was no path forward. It's a stark contrast to the comedic or fatherly roles that made him famous, a reminder that even those who exude calm and confidence can be suffering deeply beneath the surface. This understanding perhaps deepens our appreciation of his work, prompting us to recognize the bravery it takes for any performer to continue stepping into roles while carrying unspoken burdens. Hollywood is sometimes described as a dream factory, the place where illusions are spun and audiences are invited to escape into alternate realities. But for Brian Keith, as for many other performers, Hollywood was both the stage of his successes and the backdrop for personal tragedy. Consider his stepmother, Peg Entwistle, whose death near the Hollywood sign remains one of the most iconic tragedies in entertainment lore. Consider Brian's own final moments in Malibu, overshadowed by terminal illness and grief. Consider, too, that swirling environment of glitzy premieres and relentless tabloid speculation. All of it underscores an industry that thrives on the illusions of stability and fulfillment, while the reality behind closed doors can be far more complicated. Looking back, one cannot help but feel empathy for a man who, despite all the warmth he brought to others, could not find a way to save himself from despair in his final days. It's both a reminder of our collective responsibility to show compassion and awareness toward those who may be quietly suffering, and a testament to the complex tapestry of life that shaped Brian Keith into a nuanced performer. The headlines that followed his death often mentioned Uncle Bill to capture the public's sense of shock, but those headlines barely scratched the surface of a lifetime that combined family heartbreak, war trauma, a deep love for acting, and an attempt to keep forging ahead no matter the odds. In remembering Brian Keith, we can celebrate the countless smiles he put on audiences' faces, the sense of comfort he brought to primetime television, and the sincerity of his performances. We can appreciate the fact that he played fatherly roles at a time when many on-screen dads were either caricatures of stern discipline or relegated to the background. Instead, Keith's characters tended to take center stage as caring, if sometimes exasperated, parental figures, guiding children through the everyday ups and downs. Generations of viewers leaned on Uncle Bill's presence as a kind of emotional anchor. In that sense, the legacy he left is one of reassurance, a gift that continues to resonate through reruns, DVD releases, and streaming platforms where people still discover or rediscover his work. He returned with scars, both visible and invisible, but found a way to channel his experiences into the roles he took on. He married multiple times, fathered children, buried 2 of them, an immeasurable sorrow, yet still showed up on set day after day, memorizing lines, delivering comedic or dramatic performances, and striving, in one sense, to remain that comforting presence for fans. Through all of that, he seldom bragged about accolades or chased publicity stunts. Even as the decades wear on, people still discover or rewatch Family Affair, experiencing that mellow 60s vibe of a Manhattan penthouse, with Uncle Bill and Mr. French trying their best to nurture 3 bright-eyed children. Others might pick up an old DVD of The Parent Trap and smile as they see the fatherly twinkle in his eye when he's outsmarted by his mischievous twin daughters. Some fans might seek out his lesser-known films, marveling at his quiet intensity in westerns or gritty dramas. In each instance, they uncover a sliver of what made Brian Keith special, that authenticity, that sense of humility, and that intangible something that can't be taught in acting school. Going deeper, we can see how his personal biography touches on so many aspects of 20th century American life. He lived through the Great Depression, served in World War II, thrived in the golden age of Hollywood, navigated the rise of television, and experienced the cultural shifts of the 1960s and 70s. He worked alongside icons, participated in the final flourish of the old studio system, and adapted to the changing tides of entertainment well into the 1980s and 90s. It was a life shaped by diverse forces, a swirl of big historical moments, intimate family tragedies, and the evolving tapestry of American popular culture. For viewers who never knew Brian Keith beyond the friendly television father figure, understanding the depths of his life story can add a richer layer of appreciation. He was the cheerful dad in The Parent Trap, but behind those sweet roles was a lifetime marked by the highs of stardom and the lows of personal heartbreak. He was the grandson taught to read by a devoted grandmother, the child stepping onto a stage before he could fully grasp what acting really was, the war vet who came back with burdens only combat veterans can understand, and the family man who both celebrated and mourned multiple children. Finally, he was a man battling cancer, facing financial and emotional struggles, and reeling from a daughter's suicide. All of those pieces are intertwined in the final portrait. When we look at Brian Keith's filmography, we see not just a list of titles, but a mosaic of eras, genres, and emotional textures. A comedic moment here, a dramatic standoff there, a paternal wink to a child, a moment of quiet anguish in a war film. Each performance is a puzzle piece that adds to the mosaic of his life, and each invites us to see him from another angle. Fans sometimes remark on his voice, that calm, gravelly timbre that carried reassurance. Others point out his eyes, which often conveyed more than the dialogue on the page. And still others recall his comedic timing, which was never frantic or broad, but instead delivered with a subtle dryness that made the humor feel realistic rather than forced. Those qualities combined to shape a figure who, for many, defined an era of television that felt kinder, slower, and simpler than what we have today. In the years since his passing, nostalgic tributes and documentaries occasionally shine a light on Brian Keith's body of work, highlighting an actor who might not always occupy the top rung of Hollywood legends, but whose contribution was deeply felt by those who adored him. In fan circles, he remains America's uncle, a testament to how deeply that role in Family Affair resonated. Yet part of remembering him accurately also involves acknowledging how that paternal warmth coexisted with the weight of personal demons. This is the complexity that shapes so many real-world stories. The capacity to give joy to others while wrestling with private sorrows that can be overwhelming. For those inspired by Brian Keith's life, there's perhaps a lesson about forging ahead in the face of adversity. He never seemed to let his childhood dislocation or the unpredictability of a show business upbringing deter him from pursuing his craft. Nor did the trauma of war keep him from finding success as a performer. Even the heartbreak of losing loved ones did not rob him of the capacity to bring genuine warmth to his roles. He kept acting, kept showing up, kept giving something of himself to the world, even if in the end that world didn't provide him with the comfort he needed. This duality, resilience coexisting with vulnerability, lies at the heart of his story. And so how do we say goodbye to an entertainer who once felt like a member of our own family? Perhaps the best way is simply to keep his memory alive by watching his films and shows, letting that gentle presence fill our living rooms once again. It can be an act of gratitude for all those times he brought us a sense of peace or made us chuckle. Another way is to reflect on how fleeting success in life can be in Hollywood, or anywhere else for that matter. Even the brightest lights can flicker out unexpectedly. We can also use his story to recognize that behind the persona of a supportive father figure or comedic uncle, real battles might be raging. It's a reminder to be kind, to reach out, to talk about the issues that often remain unspoken until it's too late. For those who want more than just the superficial details, diving into Brian Keith's life is a journey through personal diaries, interviews, and old newspaper clippings that reveal a man at once ordinary and extraordinary. He was ordinary in that he lived, loved, endured heartbreak, and sought validation like so many of us do. He was extraordinary in that he managed to share his gifts in a way that resonated with millions, transcending personal struggles to become a fixture of American entertainment. Even though we can't speak to him now or hear his explanations for the difficult choices he faced, we do have his legacy on screen. We have that half smile, that steady presence, and that earnest approach to storytelling. And in remembering him, we recognize the beauty and the pain that can be woven into a single life. From a toddler on a film set in the 1920s, to a Marine in World War II, to a beloved sitcom father, to a man struggling under the weight of loss and terminal illness, Brian Keith's journey loops and curves through the 20th century, reflecting not just Hollywood's evolution, but America's as well. So the next time you find yourself stumbling upon an old Family Affair rerun, take a moment to appreciate the layers, behind that unassuming fatherly figure. Recall the Marine veteran who risked his life in the Pacific, the child star who once toddled through sets in the silent era of filmmaking, the adult who quietly battled sorrow, love, and loss. Let that knowledge deepen your appreciation of the gentle humor he displays on screen. Let it remind you that each performance you see is not just about entertainment, but about a deeply human story that breathes life into every line delivered. And as the closing credits roll, allow yourself to feel gratitude for the comfort he provided, knowing that in his final moments, the man behind the character could have used some of that comfort himself. Thank you for spending this time remembering Brian Keith, a figure whose on-screen generosity brought a sense of solace to countless homes, and whose off-screen trials remind us that even the gentlest souls can bear unimaginable burdens. May his story encourage us to appreciate the quiet resilience people display and to treat each other with compassion, never forgetting that behind any role, any smile, or any public facade, there may lie a deeper story we cannot see. And with that, we conclude our tribute to a man who truly left his mark on the tapestry of American entertainment. We invite you to keep exploring his filmography and to join us next time as we continue uncovering the lives behind Hollywood's brightest faces. Until then, take care of yourselves and those you love, because sometimes the strongest among us need a gentle reminder they are not alone